German Shepherd puppy barks at fire, hydrant for hours. When they discover the reason. Mrs. Margaret Sullivan watched from the window of her home in the Hope Springs neighborhood of Tucson as Duke, the 6-month-old German Shepherd puppy she had recently adopted, barked non-stop at the red fire hydrant on the corner of Magnolia Street. It had been 3 hours since the dog started, and the neighbors were beginning to complain about the relentless noise. "Duke, come here, boy," she called again, but the puppy seemed hypnotized by the hydrant, barking and scratching at its iron base as if trying to communicate something urgent. The 68-year-old widow carefully descended the porch steps, gripping the railing her late husband Richard had installed 2 years earlier. Duke had been her only companion since then, and seeing him so agitated left her deeply worried. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" She approached the dog, trying to calm him with gentle strokes, but Duke kept barking frantically, his brown eyes fixed on the faded red hydrant. Across the street, Frank, the retired mechanic who had lived there for 40 years, stepped outside, annoyed. "Mrs. Sullivan, for heaven's sake, make that dog stop. My Betty has a migraine and can't rest with all this noise." Margaret's face burned with embarrassment. She had always been a model neighbor, never causing trouble on the quiet street where she'd lived for 3 decades. "I'm so sorry, Frank. I don't know what's gotten into him today. Duke's never been like this." She tugged harder on the leash, but the puppy resisted, planting his paws firmly on the ground and continuing to bark desperately. His barks carried an urgency Margaret had never heard before, as if he was trying to warn them about something important. Jessica, Margaret's granddaughter, who had come from Chicago for the weekend, appeared at the door, concerned. The 24-year-old worked as a veterinarian in the city and had been the one to encourage her grandmother to adopt Duke from the city pound. "Grandma, what's going on? How long has Duke been like this?" "Since 2 in the afternoon, sweetheart. I've tried. Everything, but he won't move." Jessica crouched beside the dog, examining him with a professional eye. She checked his vitals, his paws, searching for anything that might explain the odd behavior. "Physically, he's fine," she said, furrowing her brow. "But this behavior, it's like he's trying to tell us something." Just then, Mrs. Nancy, the neighborhood gossip, hurried over, her floral dress fluttering. "Did you know there used to be a dog that did the same thing?" she said, lowering her voice as if sharing a secret. "About 20 years ago, stray named Buddy. He barked at this same hydrant for days." A chill ran down Margaret's spine. She vaguely remembered something like that, but at the time she'd been too busy caring for Richard after his first heart attack. "What happened? Heard of that dog?" Jessica asked curiously. Nancy paused dramatically, savoring the attention. "They found an underground gas leak. The dog smelled it and was trying to warn everyone. If it hadn't been for him, there could have been a tragedy." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now back to the story. Jessica immediately reached for her phone, but Margaret stopped her. "Wait, honey. Let's be sure before we call the gas company. I don't want to cause unnecessary panic." But Duke kept barking, now alternating between the hydrant and a specific spot on the sidewalk, as if pointing something out. His nose insistently sniffed at a crack in the concrete near the base of the hydrant. Michael, the son of Margaret, who lived in Austin, chose that exact moment for his monthly visit. The 45-year-old man, always impeccable in his grey suit, stepped out of his imported car with a disapproving look. "Mum, what's all this commotion? You can hear the dog from down the street." "Michael, I'm so glad you're here," Margaret tried to explain. "Duke is acting strange. We can't get him to stop." Her son rolled his eyes, a gesture Margaret knew well, and that always hurt her. "I told you it was a bad idea to get that dog. You're not young enough to handle an animal that size." "Don't start, Michael," Jessica defended her grandmother. "Duke has been wonderful for Grandma. This is different. He's trying to warn us about something." The siblings locked eyes in their usual tense standoff. Michael, the successful lawyer, who thought money solved everything, and Jessica, the idealist who chose to care for animals instead of pursuing the corporate career her brother expected. "Warn us about what?" Michael crossed his arms. "Dogs aren't urban problem detectors, Jessica." As the argument heated up, Duke's barking grew more intense, now frantically scratching the ground near the fire hydrant. Margaret noticed other dogs in the neighborhood were getting restless too, barking back from inside their homes. Walter, the president of the Homeowners Association, appeared with his usual authoritarian air, his graying mustache twitching with indignation. "Mrs. Sullivan, this has gone too far. I'll have to file a formal complaint. The neighborhood rules are clear about noise disturbances." "Walter, please," Margaret pleaded. "We're trying to figure it out. Maybe there's something wrong here, a gas leak or—" "A gas leak?" The man grew even more irritated. "Now you want to cause panic in the neighborhood? I'll—" "Call the city pound if that dog doesn't stop," Duke growled at the threat as if he understood. Margaret felt tears welling up. That dog had been her only joy since Richard passed, the only creature that made her feel needed and unconditionally loved. "There's no need for that," Michael interjected in his lawyerly tone. "We'll handle this situation civilly." Meanwhile, Jessica had knelt beside Duke, carefully watching where he was focusing. The dog alternated between barking and sniffing a specific spot, always returning to the same place. "Grandma, look at this." She pointed to strange marks on the concrete, as if something had been buried and the cement patched over. "These marks don't look like normal wear." Margaret moved closer, adjusting her glasses. Sure enough, there was a rectangular area where the concrete looked newer, lighter than the rest of the century-old sidewalk. "This wasn't here before," she murmured, trying to remember. "Or was it? I've lived here so long, sometimes I don't notice small changes." Michael sighed impatiently, checking his expensive wristwatch. "Mum, we need to talk about your finances. I came here for that, not to investigate sidewalks with a hysterical dog." "Michael, something's wrong here," Jessica insisted. "Animals have instincts we've lost. Duke wouldn't act like this without a reason." Nancy, who had stepped away, returned with more information. "I just remembered something. About 25 years ago, they did work on this street. Replaced the water pipes, dug everything up. It was around the time you moved here, Margaret." Margaret tried to recall. Yes, she vaguely remembered construction, men working, the noise of jackhammers. Richard had complained endlessly, saying they were disturbing his peace. Duke kept his vigil, now lying beside the hydrant but still alert, letting out low whines, and staring fixedly at the suspicious spot on the ground. "You know what I'm going to do?" Margaret said with sudden determination. "I'm going to call City Hall and request the records for the work done on this street. Something tells me Duke is right." Michael shook his head, exasperated. "Now you're going to believe a dog? Mum, we need to have a serious talk about your decisions. First it was the idea of living alone, then adopting this animal, now this—" "I don't live alone," Margaret replied firmly. "Duke lives with me, and he's better company than certain people who only show up once a month to criticize." The jab hit Michael hard. His face turned red, a vein throbbing at his temple. "I have a life, Mom, a business to run, responsibilities. I can't be here all the time like Jessica, who dropped everything to play vet." "Play?" Jessica stood up, glaring at her brother. "I've saved more lives in a month than you have in your entire career defending corrupt companies. Kids, please." Margaret tried to intervene, but the argument had already escalated. As the siblings argued, Duke stood up and began scratching at the concrete with more force, as if the family tension made him even more anxious. His barks grew more urgent, more desperate. Then something happened that made everyone stop. The puppy managed to remove a piece of the newer concrete, revealing what looked like blue plastic underneath. "What is that?" Jessica immediately knelt, brushing away more loose pieces. Beneath the poorly laid concrete was what appeared to be a thick plastic bag, the kind used in construction. Duke sniffed frantically, his tail wagging as if he'd found treasure. "Don't touch anything," ordered Michael, his lawyer instincts kicking in. It could be dangerous. But Mrs. Nancy, ever curious, had already moved closer. "Looks like there's something inside the plastic," she observed, squinting. "Something rectangular." Margaret felt her heart race. What could be buried there, and why had Duke detected it? "We should call the authorities," suggested Mr. Walter, now less irritated and more concerned. "This might be a matter for the police." "No!" Margaret surprised everyone with her vehemence. "First, let's see what it is. It might be nothing serious." Carefully, Jessica began removing more pieces of concrete. The hole grew larger, revealing that the plastic bag was well preserved, protected from moisture. "There's writing here," she pointed out. "Looks like someone wrote something with a permanent marker." Margaret leaned in, adjusting her glasses again. Her heart nearly stopped when she recognized the handwriting. "My God," she whispered, her legs weak. "This is Richard's writing." Everyone fell silent. Duke stopped barking, sitting beside Margaret as if he knew his mission was complete. "What do you mean, Dad's writing?" Michael asked, his usual arrogance gone. With trembling hands, Margaret pointed to the words on the plastic. "For Margaret, open only in case of emergency. With love, Richard, 1999. 1999, Jessica calculated. 25 years ago, right after you moved here. Margaret felt like she might faint. Richard had buried something there in a public space without ever mentioning it. What could be so important that he needed to hide it? "Grandma, are you okay?" Jessica held her arm. "Do you want to sit down?" "No," Margaret replied with renewed determination. "I want to know what my husband hid here." Ignoring Michael's protests about legality and procedure, Margaret knelt with difficulty beside the hole. Jessica helped her tear open the plastic, which had grown brittle after so many years. Inside was a metal box, the kind used to store important documents. It was rusted at the edges but seemed intact. "There's a padlock," Michael observed, now fully invested in the mystery. Margaret recognized the padlock immediately. It was the same one Richard used in his toolbox, which she still kept in the garage. "I have the key," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. Old Walter cleared his throat. "Mrs. Margaret, technically this is public property. Maybe we should—" "Walter," Margaret interrupted him with a firmness that surprised everyone. "My husband buried this here for a reason. I'm opening this box with or without your approval." Duke barked once as if supporting his owner. The dog stayed close to Margaret, protective. "Let's take it inside," suggested Jessica. "Whatever it is, you deserve privacy to find out." With Jessica's help, and surprisingly Michael's, Margaret stood up. Her son picked up the box, noticing its considerable weight. "It's heavy," he remarked. "There's a lot in here." The small procession made its way to Margaret's house, her leaning on Jessica, Michael carrying the box, Duke trotting proudly, ahead as if guiding them, and inevitably Mrs. Nancy and old Walter following behind, too curious to stay away. In the living room, with its walls covered in family photos and furniture that told decades of stories, Michael placed the box on the coffee table. "The key, Mom," he said gently, all his earlier irritation forgotten in the face of the mystery. Margaret went to the hallway closet and took out the old key ring she kept in a drawer. Her hands shook so much that Jessica had to help her find the right key. "This is it." Margaret recognized the small brass key. The padlock opened with a click that echoed in the tense silence of the room. Margaret took a deep breath before lifting the lid. The first thing she saw was a thick envelope with her name on it. Beneath it were several other envelopes, documents, and what looked like old photos wrapped in plastic. "My dear Margaret," she read aloud, recognizing Richard's handwriting once again. "If you're reading this, something has happened to me or the time has come for you to know the truth." Margaret paused, her heart tight. What truth? Richard had always been an honest, transparent man. What could he have hidden? "Go on, Grandma," Jessica encouraged, holding her hand. Margaret unfolded the letter, her hands still shaking. "First, I want you to know that everything I did was out of love for you and the children. When we moved to Magnolia Street, I discovered something about my family's past that changed everything." Michael leaned forward, his lawyer's interest piqued. "My father, who died when I was 5, wasn't who everyone thought. He had another life before he met my mother, and more importantly, he had another family," Margaret gasped. Richard's father had always been a mystery, dying young in a work accident, leaving his mother a widow with 3 small children. "I found out by chance when I went to file the house paperwork. The City Hall clerk found old records, mix-ups, with names. I started investigating, and what I found, dear Margaret, I have siblings I never knew. An entire family I was separated from." Jessica squeezed her grandmother's hand, feeling her tension. Grandpa had other siblings, she whispered. Margaret kept reading, her voice choked. I didn't tell you at the time because I was confused, scared, and also because I found out this family, they live nearby. In fact, they live on this very street. Mrs. Nancy let out an exclamation. Old Walter cleared his throat nervously. Frank Thompson, our mechanic neighbor, is my half-brother Margaret, my father's son with his first wife. Margaret nearly dropped the letter. Frank? The cranky neighbor who had just complained about Duke. This is impossible, Michael stammered. There's more, Margaret continued, tears now flowing freely. I also found out my father didn't die in the accident. He faked his own death to escape gambling debts and start a new life. When he really died years later, he left an inheritance that rightfully belongs to all his children, including me. Duke, who was lying at Margaret's feet, lifted his head and looked at the door as if sensing something. I kept all the evidence in this box, documents, photos, certificates, and also my share of the inheritance in cash and jewelry I managed to recover. I never used it because I felt guilty, as if I was stealing from Frank and his siblings. Michael picked up some of the documents from the box, examining them with a professional eye. Mom, these are deeds, birth certificates, bank documents. It's all real. If anything happens to me, Margaret, I want you to decide what to do. Reveal the truth to Frank or keep the secret, but know that this money is rightfully ours and it can secure your future and the children's. Margaret stopped reading, overwhelmed by the revelation. All these years, Richard had carried this secret. Every time he greeted Frank on the street, he knew they were brothers. There's one more page, Jessica noticed. Margaret turned the paper. P.S. I buried this outside the house because I was afraid someone might find it. Frank has a cousin who works at City Hall. He could dig through our records. The fire hydrant had just been installed, so I used the construction to hide the box. If you need it, it'll be here. I always loved you more than anything, Richard. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by Duke's heavy breathing. My God, Nancy was the first to speak. Frank Thompson is your brother-in-law. Richard's brother. Margaret felt her head spinning. So many questions, so many implications, and Richard had died carrying this burden alone. We need to tell him, Jessica said firmly. Mr. Frank has the right to know. We can't just show up with this story, Michael argued. We need to verify everything, do DNA tests if necessary. Michael's right, Walter agreed. This is too serious to act on impulse. But Margaret had already made up her mind. She stood with a determination she hadn't felt in years. I'm going to talk to Frank now, she announced. Mum, wait. Michael tried to stop her. No, son. Richard carried this secret for 25 years. He died without being able to embrace his brother. Frank lost his father twice without knowing. No more secrets. Duke barked and ran to the door as if approving the decision. Grandma, I'll go with you, Jessica offered. No, Margaret replied gently. This is something I need to do alone. Richard trusted me to make this decision, and I'll honor that trust. She took the letter and a few photos from the box. One showed Richard's father as a young man, and the resemblance to Frank was undeniable now that she knew the truth. As she left the house with Duke faithfully by her side, Margaret saw other neighbors had gathered, drawn by the commotion. The news that something had been unearthed was already spreading. Frank was in his garage, still working on an old car. Despite being retired, Betty, his wife, was on the porch. Mrs. Sullivan, Frank greeted her curtly. Finally got the dog under control? Duke growled softly, as if sensing the tension. Frank, I need to talk to you, Margaret said, her voice surprisingly steady. It's about Richard and your father. The man frowned, confused. My father died when I was 10, Mrs. Sullivan. What does Richard have to do with it? Everything, she replied, handing him the photo. Look closely at this man. Frank took the photo impatiently but froze when he saw the image. His eyes widened, his face losing color. Where did you get this? His voice was hoarse. Frank, Margaret said gently, we need to talk. Richard was your brother. The man staggered, needing to lean against the car. Betty rushed down from the porch. What's going on? Frank! "It's not true," he stammered. "My father died. He had no other children." "Your father didn't die in that accident," Margaret explained patiently. "He started a new life, a new family. Richard found out 25 years ago but didn't have the courage to tell you." She held out the letter, Frank's hands shaking as much as hers had minutes earlier. As Frank read, with Betty peering over his shoulder, Margaret watched the emotions flicker across his face. Shock, denial, anger, and finally, deep sorrow. "All these years," he murmured. "Richard knew. We talked about cars, about the weather, and he knew we were brothers. He was afraid," Margaret explained, "afraid you'd reject him, that you wouldn't believe him. And there was the matter of the inheritance." "Inheritance?" Frank looked up sharply. Margaret explained about the money and documents in the box, how Richard had never touched any of it out of guilt. "He really was my brother," Frank said with a sad smile. "Too honest for his own good. I would have split everything with him if I'd known." Betty hugged her husband, tears in her eyes too. "All those lost years," she lamented. "You could have been a family." Duke, who had been quiet, approached Frank and gently nudged his leg with his nose, as if offering comfort. The man who had complained about the dog just hours earlier knelt and stroked his head. "You're the one who found it, weren't you?" he said to the dog. "Clever boy. Knew something important was there." Margaret felt tears welling up again. Somehow Duke had sensed the buried connection, the story that needed to come to light. "Frank," she said, "I know it's a lot to take in, but Richard left instructions about the inheritance. He wanted it divided fairly." The man stood, looking her in the eye. "Mrs. Sullivan, you and Richard were my neighbors for 25 years, good neighbors. Now I find out we're family." He paused, emotion thickening his voice. "The money doesn't matter. What matters is I lost my brother without ever getting to call him that." Just then Michael and Jessica appeared, worried about Margaret's delay. "Mum, is everything okay?" Michael asked, eyeing the emotional scene suspiciously. "Michael, Jessica," Margaret said, "I'd like you to meet your Uncle Frank." The revelation caused fresh shock. Jessica, always more emotional, immediately hugged Frank. Michael, more reserved, extended a hand for a formal shake, which Frank turned into a tight embrace. "My God!" Frank laughed and cried at the same time. "I have nieces and nephews. Betty, we have nieces and nephews." The news spread down the street like wildfire. Soon other neighbors approached, curious about the commotion. Mrs. Nancy, of course, was already telling the story to anyone who'd listen, growing more dramatic with each retelling. "We should do a DNA test," Michael suggested, ever practical, to be absolutely sure. "We will," Frank agreed, "but look at us." He slung an arm around Michael. "Same height, same stubborn chin. We're family, I have no doubts." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us newcomers a lot. Now, continuing. That night, two families who had been neighbors for decades gathered as one. Margaret's dinner table, which for years had seated only her and Duke, was now full. Frank and Betty, their children Robert and Jennifer, who had rushed in from nearby towns, Michael and Jessica, and even a few close neighbors. Duke circled the group, receiving treats and affection, the hero of the night. If not for his persistence, Richard's secret would still be buried. "A toast," Frank proposed, raising his glass. "To Richard, who, even in doubt, was my brother. And to Duke, who brought us together." Everyone raised their glasses, moved. Margaret stroked Duke's head as he lay at her feet. "How did you know, my boy?" she whispered. "How did you know something important was there?" Jessica, ever the scientist, had a theory. "Grandma, dogs have a sense of smell thousands of times stronger than ours. It's possible Duke picked up a specific scent, maybe grandfather's cologne, lingering on the documents, or even your scent on the things he touched before burying them." Margaret considered the possibility. It made sense in a way. Duke had always shown special interest in Richard's belongings that she'd kept, but deep down she preferred to believe there was something more, that somehow Richard had guided Duke to the secret, knowing it was time for the truth to come out. The conversation around the table flowed between tears and laughter. Frank shared stories of his difficult childhood after his father's supposed death, how his mother had struggled to raise 3 children alone. Margaret reminisced about Richard, her silent regrets, the times she'd caught him gazing thoughtfully at Frank's house. He once said, Margaret recalled, that he wished he had a brother to talk about cars with. I didn't understand at the time since he had 2 sisters. I was right here, Frank said sadly, so close we could have restored cars together, like I always dreamed of doing with my dad. Jennifer, Frank's daughter, a 40-year-old woman with the same determined look as her father, made a suggestion. What if we honored Uncle Richard's memory by doing something together, as a family? What do you have in mind? Jessica asked, intrigued. Well, you own that vacant lot at the end of the street, don't you? Jennifer glanced at Walter, the Homeowners Association president. How about turning it into a park? We could call it Richard Wilson Park. Walter scratched his chin thoughtfully. We'd need City Hall approval, funds for construction. I can handle the legal side, Michael offered, surprising everyone. As for the funds, well, there's the inheritance Dad left. What better way to honor him than by investing in the community? Frank slapped the table enthusiastically. I'll provide the labor. I still have connections. I can get materials at a discount. Robert, he looked at his son, you're the engineer. Can you design it? Of course, Dad, Robert agreed. We can make it something special, with a playground for kids, benches for seniors, even a space for dogs. Duke barked, as if especially approving of that last part. The energy in the room shifted completely. What had begun as a painful revelation was turning into something beautiful, a family coming together, a community rallying. There's one condition, Margaret said, and everyone turned to her. I want a special plaque for Duke. After all, without him, none of this would have happened. Laughter filled the room and Duke wagged his tail proudly, somehow knowing he was the center of attention. In the weeks that followed, Magnolia Street underwent a transformation. The story of the long-lost brothers reunited by a persistent dog spread through town. Reporters came asking for interviews, but Margaret and Frank preferred to keep things private. The park project moved quickly. Michael, who used to visit his mother out of obligation once a month, now came every week to check on the progress. Jessica extended her vacation to help, even creating a responsible adoption program inspired by Duke. You know, Mum, Michael said one day as they watched Frank and Robert working on the lot, I think Dad knew what he was doing when he hid that box. How so? Margaret asked, Duke lying between them on the makeshift bench. He could have kept it in a safe in a bank, but you chose to bury it here where you'd pass by every day, where one day somehow it would be found. Margaret considered her son's words. Richard had always been a man of faith, believing everything happened in its own time. Maybe he knew I'd need time to be ready, she said, and that Frank would, too. 25 years ago, maybe we weren't ready for this truth. What about Duke? Michael smiled, petting the dog. Do you think Dad saw this coming too? Margaret laughed. Your father loved dogs. He always wanted one, but we never had one. Maybe he sent Duke to us. It was a fanciful thought, Margaret knew, but comforting all the same. Her relationship with Frank's family grew stronger each day. Betty and Margaret discovered they shared a love for gardening and began planning flower beds for the future park together. Jennifer and Jessica, despite their age difference, became close friends, bonded by their love for animals and determination to make a difference. But not everything was rosy. As documents were examined and their father's story grew more complex, painful details emerged. The man had indeed fled gambling debts, abandoning his first family to fend for themselves. When he rebuilt his life, he made his fortune through not always honest business dealings. Our father wasn't a saint, Frank said one night, after uncovering documents about questionable deals. But he was our father. Margaret, ever wise, placed a hand on her brother-in-law's shoulder. Richard used to say we can't choose our past, but we can choose what to do with our future. You two are honest good men, that's what matters. Duke, who had developed a sixth sense for emotional tension, approached Frank and rested his head on his knee. The simple gesture broke the tension and the man smiled. This dog, he said, is better than most people I know. The inheritance issue was resolved in a way that surprised everyone. After much debate, They decided to use most of it for the park and to create an assistance fund for struggling families in the neighborhood. Richard would have approved, Margaret was certain. The remaining money was divided equally among all. The grandchildren for education. Michael initially refused his share, saying he didn't need it, but Jessica convinced him to accept and donate it to veterinary school scholarships. A particularly emotional day came when they found, at the bottom of the box, a journal Richard had kept during the time he discovered the truth. The pages revealed his anguish, his desire to connect with Frank, his fear of rejection. "Today I spent all day working up the courage to talk to him," one entry said. "We got home at the same time. Our eyes met. For a moment I thought he knew. But he just nodded and went inside. I'm a coward." Frank wept openly, reading those words. "I always thought Richard was a bit distant," he confessed. "Now I understand. He was protecting himself from the pain of not being able to call me brother." Duke, throughout all this, kept his routine of stopping by the fire hydrant during walks, but now he'd only sniff briefly before moving on, satisfied. His mission was complete. The vet Jessica consulted about his behavior had an interesting explanation. "Dogs sometimes fixate on places where they sense something's wrong," she explained. "It could have been the smell or some vibration in the ground from the hollow space, or," she smiled, "it could be that some dogs just know things we can't." They explain. Margaret preferred the last option. The park's construction became a community event. Neighbors who'd barely spoken for years now worked side by side. Mrs. Nancy, the self-appointed historian of the project, documented everything with her phone, creating a digital album for posterity. Her husband Walter, the Homeowners Association president who had initially threatened to call the city pound, for Duke was now one of the dog's biggest advocates. "This animal has united our community," he declared to anyone who would listen. "We should give him a Medal of Honor." What started as a joke soon became reality. Jessica crafted a small wooden medal that read, "Duke, Hero of Magnolia Street," which the dog proudly wore on his collar. But life, as Margaret knew well, was rarely simple. Just when everything seemed perfect, a new revelation shook the newly reunited family. It was Robert, Frank's engineer son, who broke the news. While researching old records for the park project, he uncovered something disturbing. "Dad," he said during a family meeting, his face serious, "I found more documents about Grandpa. He had another family after yours." The silence was absolute. Even Duke sensed the tension, lifting his head alertly. "What are you saying?" Frank asked, his voice tight. "After he left you and started a family with Richard, he did it again. There are records of a marriage in Colorado 15 years later. He had 2 more children." Margaret felt her heart sink. More siblings, more secrets. "Do they know about us?" Jessica asked. "I don't know," Robert admitted. "I only found the records. William Wilson Jr. and Sarah Wilson Rogers. They'd be in their early 30s now. Michael, ever the lawyer, was already considering the implications. This changes the inheritance issue. If they're legitimate heirs, they have rights." "Rights?" Frank exploded. "What rights? The man discarded families like changing clothes." "Frank," Betty tried to calm him, "it's not their fault. I know," he sighed, "but it's too much. We barely processed Richard being my brother, and now this." Duke stood and leaned against Frank's legs. The man automatically began petting him, the motion helping to steady him. What would Richard have done, Margaret wondered aloud. Everyone turned to her. "Richard kept the secret out of fear, out of doubt," she continued. "But deep down, he wanted the truth to come out. That's why he left everything documented, organized. He knew that someday someone would find it," Jessica finished, "or some clever dog." Duke wagged his tail at the mention. "So?" Margaret looked around. "Do we find them, or leave things as they are?" The decision wasn't easy. They spent hours debating, arguing. Michael thought it legally risky. Jennifer feared more emotional complications. Robert argued for full transparency. In the end, Frank made the final call. "We'll find them," he said firmly. "If I've learned anything from all this, it's that secrets only cause pain. Richard suffered 25 years because he couldn't bring himself to talk to me. I won't repeat that mistake." "Are you sure?" Margaret asked gently. I am, he nodded. There are siblings, Margaret. We didn't choose our father, we didn't choose the circumstances, but we can choose what to do now. The search for their Colorado siblings wasn't easy. Robert used his professional contacts, Michael his legal resources. It took weeks to locate William and Sarah, who lived in Denver. The first contact was delicate. Michael, with his professional experience, made the initial call. Their reaction was complete shock and disbelief. "Is this some kind of scam?" William had asked suspiciously. "Our father died when we were kids." The story repeated itself, Margaret realized. Another man who faked his death. Another abandoned family. After much discussion and document exchanges, William and Sarah agreed to come to Tucson. The meeting was set for a Saturday at Margaret's house, neutral territory. The tension was palpable when the rental car pulled up in front of the house. Duke, sensing his owner's anxiety, stayed close, occasionally nudging her hand with his. "Close." William stepped out first, a 34-year-old man with the same eyes as Richard and Frank. Sarah, 2 years younger, had the determined chin that seemed to be a family trait. "So," William said after the tense greetings, "we have 2 older brothers we never knew existed." "And we have 2 younger siblings in the same situation," Frank replied, trying to break the ice. Sarah looked around, taking in the faces that held undeniable family resemblances. "Our mother," she said softly. "Did she know? About you?" "We don't know," Margaret answered honestly. "Richard left a lot of documents, but nothing suggests your mother knew about his past." It was Duke who once again eased the tension. The dog approached the visitors, sniffing them curiously before sitting right in the middle of the group, as if to say everyone was welcome. "Is this the famous detective dog?" Sarah asked, a small smile appearing. The story even reached Colorado. Her dog who uncovered buried family secrets. "Duke," Margaret introduced proudly, "our little hero." William knelt to pet the dog, and the simple gesture seemed to break a barrier. Soon, they were all seated in the living room, sharing stories, comparing experiences of growing up without a father. "He told stories about you," Sarah revealed, surprising everyone. Not by name, but he spoke of 2 children he had to leave behind. He said it was to protect them. "Protect them from what?" Frank asked, bitter. "From debts, from creditors," William explained. Apparently he owed dangerous people. At least, that's what he said. The image of their father that emerged was complex. A flawed man who ran from responsibilities but carried enough guilt to mention the children he'd abandoned. "What about Richard?" Margaret asked. "Did he mention him?" "There was a middle child," Sarah frowned, trying to remember. "He said he was the most like him, the most determined. That must be Richard." Margaret felt tears in her eyes. Even in abandonment, their father had recognized his son's qualities. The conversation flowed for hours. They learned William was a doctor, inspired to help others after being unable to help his father with his supposed terminal illness. Sarah was a teacher, dedicated to underprivileged children, perhaps trying to give what she felt was missing in her own childhood. "We're all professionals focused on helping others," Jessica observed. "Maybe it's our way of making up for what our grandfather didn't do." It was a perceptive remark that made everyone reflect. The issue of inheritance inevitably came up. William and Sarah were shocked to learn there was money involved. "We didn't come for that," William clarified quickly. "We came out of curiosity, for connection. We didn't know about any inheritance." "We believe you," Frank said, "but for fairness you're entitled to a share." The debate that followed was surprisingly civil. In the end, they decided to include William and Sarah in the park project, expanding it to include a small community library, combining Sarah's love for education with the legacy Richard had left. "I think Richard would approve," Margaret said, "turning secrets into something that benefits the community." Duke barked his approval, making everyone laugh. In the weeks that followed, the expanded family worked together on the project. The initial differences faded as they discovered common interests and shared values. William, with his medical experience, suggested adding exercise equipment for seniors in the park. Sarah proposed outdoor reading programs. The park was becoming a true community center. But it was Jennifer who came up with the most touching idea. "What if we made a mural?" she suggested during a planning meeting, telling the family's story but in an artistic way without revealing too much. Something about lost and found connections. "With Duke at the center," Jessica added. After all, he was the catalyst for everything. The idea was unanimously approved. They hired a local artist, Rose Thompson, who they discovered by coincidence was a distant cousin of Frank, to create the mural. Throughout this process, Duke kept up his routine of patrolling the neighborhood, but now he was treated like a celebrity. Kids asked to take photos with him. Adults brought him treats. The dog accepted it all with royal dignity. "He's changed," Margaret observed one morning. "He's calmer, more content." "He fulfilled his mission," Jessica said. "Some say animals sense energy imbalances. Duke sensed the secret, the unresolved pain, and didn't rest until he fixed it." It was a mystical theory, but Margaret liked. The park's grand opening was set for the one-year anniversary of the discovery. The date was approaching, and preparations consumed the whole community. What had started as a family project had become a movement for the entire neighborhood. Nancy oversaw the decorations with an iron fist. Walter handled permits and paperwork. Betty and Margaret supervised the planting of new trees. The siblings, all of them, worked in harmony, something unthinkable just months earlier. But as Margaret had learned, life always held surprises. 2 weeks before the opening, she woke up to find Duke motionless in his bed. For a terrifying moment, she feared the worst. But then she saw his shallow breathing. The dog was alive, but clearly sick. "Jessica," she called her granddaughter, who was staying at her house. "Something's wrong with Duke." Jessica came running, still in her pajamas. Her veterinary training kicked in immediately. "He has a fever," she diagnosed after examining him, "and he seems to be in pain. We need to take him to the clinic now." Panic spread through the family. The news of Duke's illness mobilized everyone. Frank offered his car, the most comfortable one. Michael cancelled important meetings. William drove overnight from Denver. At the vet clinic, the diagnosis was concerning. "It's a serious infection," explained Dr. Miller, the vet. "Likely from a wound that went unnoticed. It's affecting multiple organs." "But he'll be okay, right?" Margaret asked, her voice trembling. "We'll do everything we can," the doctor replied carefully. "But it's serious. The next 48 hours will be crucial." The clinic's waiting room turned into a family vigil. Margaret refused to leave, and the others took turns keeping her company. Even neighbors stopped by, asking for updates on the street hero. "He's just a dog," Michael muttered at one point, trying to rationalize, but the tears in his eyes betrayed his words. "No," Frank corrected. "He's family. Duke brought us together. He's as much a part of this family as any of us." Through the long night, stories were shared. Each person had a special memory of Duke to recount. The dog who had brought unity was now binding them even tighter through shared worry. Jessica stayed close, monitoring every change, every vital sign. Her professional dedication blended with her personal love for the animal she'd recommended to her grandmother. "It was my idea," she said through tears. "I'm the one who insisted Grandma adopt a dog." "And it was the best thing you could have done." Margaret hugged her. "Look at everything Duke brought us. Every moment was worth it, no matter what happens." On the morning of the second day, when hope was fading, Duke opened his eyes, weak but aware, his tail wagging slightly at the sight of Margaret. "My boy," she cried in relief. "My brave boy." The recovery was slow. Duke needed to stay hospitalized for a week, receiving intensive care. The vet bill was astronomical, but before Margaret could worry, the family had already organized to split the costs. "It's the least we can do," said William. "This dog gave us a family." When Duke was finally discharged, he was welcomed like a war hero. Neighbors applauded as the car pulled up. Children had made signs saying, "Welcome back, Duke." Still weak, the dog was carried inside by Frank, who volunteered for the task. "You gave me the greatest gift of my life," he whispered to the dog. "Now it's my turn to take care of you." Duke's recovery coincided with the final touches on the park. As if waiting for him, the community had postponed the grand opening until the dog could attend, but there was one last twist waiting for them. During Duke's illness, Jessica had run full tests, including a canine DNA test out of curiosity. The results came in 2 days before the opening and brought a surprise. "Grandma," she said, showing the papers, "Duke isn't a pure German shepherd. He has DNA from a border collie." "So what?" Margaret didn't understand the significance. Border collies are known for their exceptional intelligence and their ability to find things. They're used in rescues, in detection. Duke inherited the best traits of both breeds, so he was genetically programmed to find secrets, Michael joked. "In a way, yes," Jessica laughed. "But the most interesting part is this. The analysis shows he has rare genetic markers. Very rare." She paused dramatically. "There's a chance Duke is descended from a specific lineage of working dogs. Dogs trained to find missing people." The silence that followed was profound. Could it be too much of a coincidence? "Are you saying," Frank voiced what everyone was thinking, "that Duke was meant to find us?" "I'm saying sometimes," Jessica smiled. "Science confirms what the heart already knows. Duke is special. He always has been." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. The day of the grand opening of Richard Wilson Park dawned clear and sunny. The whole neighborhood was buzzing with final preparations. Booths were set up, live music was arranged, and the smell of homemade food filled the air. Duke, still recovering but determined to take part, was fitted with a small cart, adapted by Frank so he wouldn't have to walk too much. The dog accepted the gesture with royal dignity, allowing the children to gently pull him around the park. Margaret watched everything from the honorary bench, moved. Beside her, the whole family, Frank and Betty, Michael and Jessica, William and Sarah, all the grandchildren. A family that a year ago hadn't known they existed. "Richard would be so proud," Betty murmured. "He is," Margaret replied with conviction. "Wherever he is, he's seeing this." The official ceremony was simple, but touching. Michael gave a speech about family and second chances. Frank spoke about brotherhood discovered late, but no less precious. Jessica read excerpts from Richard's diary that they'd found. But the most emotional moment was when they unveiled the mural. Rose had created a masterpiece, a tree with roots intertwined beneath the soil, separate on the surface but connected where no one could see. At the center, a black and gold dog dug revealing hidden connections. Around it, faces resembling all the family members, united by golden threads representing the rediscovered bonds. "It's perfect," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. The dedication plaque simply read, "Richard Wilson Park, where secrets become bridges." In honor of Duke, the dog who taught us that the truth, even when buried, always finds its way to the light. But the biggest surprise came from Frank. After the official speeches, he asked for the microphone. "I have something to say," he began, visibly emotional. "I spent months thinking about my brother Richard, about all the lost years, and I realized something. We can't change the past, but we can honor those we love through our actions." He paused, searching for Margaret with his eyes. "So, Margaret, Betty and I would like to make a proposal. We know you live alone with Duke, and that house holds so many memories, but we've also built new memories as a family. We'd like to renovate the old shed in our backyard and turn it into a smaller, more practical home for you and Duke. That way, we'd always be close, just as Richard would have wanted." Margaret was speechless. The offer was more than a house. It was a declaration that she was truly family. I don't know what to say," she stammered. "Say yes, Grandma," Jessica encouraged. "Then Duke would have a bigger yard to explore." Hearing his name, Duke barked from his wagon as if giving his approval. "And there's more," William stepped forward. "Sarah and I have decided we're moving to Tucson. We want to be near the family we just discovered. I'll open a clinic here, and Sarah's already looking for teaching jobs." "We're rebuilding what our father destroyed," Sarah added. "A real family, bound not by obligation, but by choice." The crowd applauded, many openly crying, moved by the story of resilience and unity. The celebration continued into the afternoon. Duke, from his royal wagon, received pets and treats from everyone. Children played on the new playground, seniors tested the exercise equipment, and families picnicked on the freshly planted grass. "Look at this," Jessica said to Margaret. "An entire park was born because a stubborn dog wouldn't stop barking at a fire hydrant." Margaret laughed, stroking Duke's head. "The best things in life come from the most unexpected places," she mused. As the sun set, painting the sky gold and pink, the family gathered for one last photo. Duke, positioned at the center, seemed to understand the moment's significance. "Say family," instructed the photographer. And they did, their voices, full of emotion and truth. That night, back at home, Margaret sat in her favorite armchair with Duke lying at her feet. The house was filled with the sounds of family. Jessica on the phone with friends in Chicago recounting the day, Michael in the kitchen making tea for everyone, Frank and Betty's voices drifting from the backyard as they already made plans for the shed's renovation. "We did it, Richard," she whispered, looking at her husband's photo on the shelf. "The truth finally set us free." Duke lifted his head and rested his muzzle on Margaret's lap, his brown eyes filled with a wisdom beyond his breed. "Thank you, my boy," she said, stroking his ears, "for never giving up, for knowing something important was waiting to be found, for giving us the courage to face the past and build a better future." The dog sighed contentedly, closing his eyes. His mission was complete. The family was united, the secrets revealed, the wounds beginning to heal. But Margaret knew the story didn't end there. It was only the start of a new chapter, where a family torn apart by lies came together through truth, where neighbors became kin, where a simple dog proved that love and persistence could move mountains, or, in this case, unearth secrets. In the months that followed, life on Magnolia Street was completely transformed. The park had become the heart of the neighborhood, a gathering place for all generations. The community library that Sarah had established was thriving, with book clubs and after-school tutoring. William's clinic offered affordable care, staying true to the spirit of community that now defined the family. Duke, fully recovered, had taken on the role of the neighborhood's official mascot. Jessica created a program where he visited schools, teaching children about the importance of animals and how they could teach us about loyalty, perseverance, and unconditional love. Michael, inspired by the whole experience, began dedicating part of his time to pro bono cases, helping families with complex legal situations. The transformation in him was remarkable. The distant son, once focused solely on material success, was now a constant and warm presence in his mother's life. You know, Mom," he said one day while helping organize the move to the new house, "I spent so much time chasing success that I forgot what really matters. Duke taught me a lesson no college ever could. Family is everything." Margaret hugged her son, proud of the person he was becoming. The new house, affectionately nicknamed Grandma's house by the grandchildren, was finished in record time. Frank personally oversaw every detail, ensuring it was perfect for Margaret and Duke. Single story with discreet support rails, a fenced backyard for Duke, and close enough to the main house to maintain independence safely. On moving day, another surprise. The entire community showed up to help. It was incredible to see how Duke's story had touched everyone, creating bonds that went beyond ordinary neighborly relations. Nancy, now the family's official chronicler, was writing a book about the whole story. "The Dog Who Dug Up Love," she called it, with her flair for the dramatic. "It's going to be a bestseller," she proclaimed, "and all the profits will go to the shelter where Duke came from to help other dogs find their families." It was a beautiful idea, and Margaret approved, on the condition that the family's privacy was respected. As Duke grew older, his muzzle turning white, his energy waning but his wisdom growing, Margaret often reflected on the miracle he had worked in their lives. From a rowdy puppy barking at a fire hydrant, he had become the catalyst for healing generational wounds, uniting a fractured family and transforming an entire community. "Some say there are no coincidences," Jessica remarked one day, watching Duke nap in the sun, "that everything happens for a reason. Duke came exactly when we needed him, found exactly what needed to be found. Your grandfather used to say the same thing, Margaret replied, that God works in mysterious ways. Maybe Duke was the crooked line that straightened out our story. And so on Magnolia Street in the heart of Tucson, a family that had once been fractured by secrets now thrived in truth. The park remained a living symbol of how pain could turn into beauty, how buried secrets could become the foundation for something greater. Duke, the unlikely four-legged hero, had taught everyone a fundamental lesson. Sometimes the answers we seek are right under our noses, waiting only for us to have the courage or the canine stubbornness to dig them up. And whenever they passed the red fire hydrant, now adorned with a small commemorative plaque, Margaret and Duke would pause for a moment. She, to silently give thanks for all that had happened. He, to give a satisfied sniff, making sure everything was still as it should be. Because in the end that was Duke's magic. He knew that family wasn't just about blood ties, but about the connections we choose to nurture, the secrets we choose to reveal, and the love we choose to share. And, somewhere Margaret was certain, Richard was smiling, knowing his secret had finally served its purpose, not to divide, but to unite. Not to hide, but to reveal the best in all of them. The end of the story. If you've made it this far, tell us in the comments, do you believe animals have a sixth sense for discovering what we need? Leave your like and subscribe for more heartwarming stories about how love and truth always find their way.